New York City is facing a $127 billion question, and the answer might just change the way we think about who pays for the American dream.
Wow. Yeah, that is a huge number to wrap your head around right from the jump.
It really is. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are tearing into the explosive political and economic debates surrounding New York City's new mayor, Zohran Mamdani.
Yeah.
He brings massive tax proposals to the table, and he faces a fierce backlash from incredibly vocal critics.
Oh, absolutely fierce.
To figure out what this high-stakes standoff means for you, we gathered a totally diverse stack of sources. We pulled breaking news reports, fiery political op-eds from right-leaning publications, and even a 1996 academic Wikipedia page breaking down post-colonial African political structures.
Which sounds completely unrelated, but it is actually the key to this whole thing.
Exactly. Our mission today is to unpack the ideology driving these sweeping new policies, examine the fierce criticisms from his opponents, and figure out what happens when progressive theory collides with cold, hard city spreadsheets.
Yeah, we have a fascinating collision happening right now. You've got a highly progressive new mayor, armed with bold ideas about wealth and inequality, and he is crashing headfirst into the mathematical realities of running the largest city in the United States.
Right.
And the arguments from his conservative critics provide a sharp, intense counter-narrative to his entire worldview.
So to understand this firestorm, we need to look at the brutal mathematical reality staring Mayor Mamdani in the face right now. Let's get a fast-paced look at the immediate situation.
Let's do the numbers.
It's early 2026, and he is looking at a massive $5.4 billion deficit on a preliminary city budget of $127 billion.
I mean, that is a massive hole to fill.
To fix it, he wants to attack the shortfall with aggressive new taxes targeting the wealthiest residents. He plans to raise personal income taxes by 2% on anyone making over $1 million a year.
Bumping their top rate from 3.9% to 5.9%.
Right. On top of that, he wants to hike corporate taxes from 7.5% to 11.5%.
But he immediately hit a massive roadblock on that.
He did. State Governor Kathy Hochul strongly opposes the wealth tax, and she actually has the power to block it.
Yeah.
Facing that wall, Mamdani proposed a highly controversial backup plan.
And this is where things get really heated.
If the state blocks his wealth tax, he threatens to trigger a 9.5% property tax hike.
Wow.
That backup plan bypasses the billionaires entirely and hits 3 million middle-class and working-class New Yorkers directly in their wallets.
And as you can imagine, threatening the middle class instantly ignited a political firestorm across the city.
It absolutely set off alarms everywhere. But to really grasp why he pushes these specific levers, we first need to understand the man at the center of it, who is Zohran Mamdani.
He brings a very unique background to the mayor's office.
He does. He was born in Kampala, Uganda in 1991. His father is a Muslim of Indian descent, and his mother is Hindu. He grew up surrounded by privilege and academia, eventually moving to the United States and becoming a citizen in 2018. But the sources suggest that to really grasp his political ideology, we need to look closely at his father's work.
Yeah, the intellectual influence his father had on him is profound. Mahmoud Mamdani is a prominent political scientist and Columbia University professor.
Okay.
Back in 1996, he published a highly influential book titled Citizen and Subject: Contemporary Africa and the Legacy of Late Colonialism.
That's the Wikipedia page we looked at.
Exactly. Our sources highlight how this specific text shaped the environment Zohran grew up in. What's fascinating here is how his father viewed power.
Break down the core idea of that book for us, because, I mean, how does a 1996 academic text on African colonialism connect to a 2026 tax plan in New York City? On the surface, those seem completely unrelated.
I know, it sounds like a stretch, but the connection runs incredibly deep when you look at how he views society. In his book, Mahmoud Mamdani analyzes how colonial powers maintain control over massive populations by artificially dividing the people they ruled.
How did they divide them?
The state created two distinct groups. First, you had citizens who lived in urban centers, operated under civil law, and held actual rights and privileges.
Okay, the privileged class.
Right. Then you had subjects who lived in rural areas under local despotic control, governed by rigid customary laws without true rights.
So they were entirely marginalized.
Exactly. And the core argument of the book is that even after African nations gained independence, the new post-colonial governments often just repackaged those exact same oppressive divided structures.
They just changed the management, basically.
Yes, they kept the system that legally and economically separated the privileged few from the marginalized many.
So Zohran Mamdani grows up immersed in these intense academic discussions about systemic inequality, artificial divisions of class, and how governments structurally separate the haves from the have-nots.
Right. He learns from a young age that society is often rigged to benefit a small group of citizens at the expense of a massive group of subjects.
That makes a lot of sense. The academic environment he was raised in focused intensely on deconstructing those exact power dynamics.
And Zoran's current political focus on justice, citizenship, and dismantling extreme wealth stems directly from this background.
He's applying that colonial framework to modern New York.
He is. He views the immense wealth gap in New York City through a similar lens. He sees a structural divide where the ultra-wealthy operate almost as a separate class of fully enfranchised citizens.
While the working class struggles to survive as marginalized subjects.
Exactly. In his view, the government must actively break down this divide to ensure everyone operates on an equal playing field.
But this exact elite academic background forms the foundation of the fierce backlash he currently faces. We read several highly critical op-eds from right-leaning publications, and they attack his origin story aggressively.
They really do. They accuse him of massive hypocrisy.
For instance, Froma Harap wrote a blistering piece in the Times Republican. She points out his highly privileged upbringing as the child of a Columbia University professor and a celebrated filmmaker.
Yeah, Harap claims he is merely accessorizing with socialist ideology.
Accessorizing. That's a strong word.
The critics are using his elite background to paint his entire persona as a champion of the working class as a total fabrication. They argue he is playing a role.
And Harap's article even brings up a major controversy regarding his college applications.
Right, the Columbia application.
She notes that Zohran allegedly lied on his Columbia University application by checking a box claiming to be Black or African American.
And the critics argue he used this maneuver to take a spot specifically meant for the descendants of slavery and Jim Crow.
They use this to emphasize their claim that he manipulates the system for his own elite advantage while pretending to be a victim of it.
Yeah, they aren't just attacking his policies, they are actively attacking his identity and his right to represent these working class communities.
Harap pulls no punches here. She basically argues that Mamdani has never experienced the actual grinding struggles of the working class he claims to represent. She even wrote, Mamdani, meanwhile, has never run a lemonade stand.
It's a brutal line. The critics want you to see a wealthy academic playing revolutionary, totally disconnected from the daily grind of the city's economy.
And this character attack sets the perfect stage for the conservative pushback against his actual economic policies.
Because by framing him as an out-of-touch academic, the critics argue that his intellectual theories fail completely when they crash into the real-world economics of New York City.
They see his budget not as a noble quest for equality, but as a dangerous academic experiment being run on real businesses and real families.
Let's look at what happens when those revolutionary theories hit a $127 billion city spreadsheet.
This brings us to his massive budget proposals and the economics of the welfare state. Mamdani claims the city faces an unprecedented affordability crisis.
To combat this, he wants to spend heavily.
Really heavily. His financial plan outlines $2.2 billion for universal pre-K. He wants to dedicate over $21 million to deportation defense and immigration legal services.
He pushes for free busing.
He even floated the radical idea of city-run grocery stores to artificially lower food costs.
And conservative commentators view these expansive proposals as disastrous government overreach. Let's examine an op-ed published in Israel National News by Rabbi Yitzhak Ruderman.
What's his take?
The author outright rejects Mamdani's underlying premise of an affordability crisis. Ruderman takes a long historical view, referencing the brutal poverty of the French and Russian revolutions.
To say that America isn't anything like that.
Exactly. He argues America is absolutely nothing like those starving peasant societies. In fact, he argues the United States is already the greatest welfare state on earth.
The author lists the massive safety nets already operating in the background of everyday life.
He points to free public schools,
Medicaid providing health care for millions of low-income residents,
Medicare for the elderly.
Section 8 housing vouchers that help families pay rent, and food stamps.
With all that in place, Ruderman accuses Mamdani of gaslighting the public.
He argues Mamdani tricks lower-income citizens into believing a massive crisis exists just to push a socialist agenda.
When in reality, the state already provides an unprecedented level of financial support.
The conservative argument here is that pushing the safety net any further risks crossing a dangerous line.
They warn that moving toward a model where the state provides everything for free from housing to groceries will ultimately bankrupt the entire system.
And this argument about bankruptcy leads directly into the controversy over who actually pays for all of these grand academic visions.
Right.
Here is where it gets really interesting. Remember that backup plan we mentioned in the news hook?
The threat of a 9.5% property tax hike hitting the middle class.
Yes. Well, an article in The Federalist by Christopher Jacobs argues that Mamdani just did conservatives a huge favor by putting that threat on the table.
Jacobs calls it a Kinsley gaffe.
For anyone unfamiliar with the term, a Kinsley gaffe is when a politician accidentally speaks an undeniable, inconvenient truth out loud.
And according to Jacobs, the political left relies on a massive, ongoing deception.
They tell the public that the government can provide endless benefits, free healthcare, and subsidized groceries, and promise that only the rich will ever have to pay for it.
But by putting a massive middle-class property tax hike on the table the moment his wealth tax faced opposition, Jacobs argues Mamdani exposed that lie.
He proved that the math simply requires massive tax increases on everyday middle-class homeowners to fund these sweeping agendas.
The article actually brings in a famous quote from former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher to drive this point home.
She famously said, "Socialist governments traditionally do make a financial mess. They always run out of other people's money."
The Federalist piece uses that quote to argue that Mamdani has finally run out of the billionaires' money in New York and now must come for the working families just trying to keep their heads above water.
The critics apply the same harsh economic lens to Mamdani's specific localized ideas too, like those city-run grocery stores.
Oh, the grocery stores. The Times Republican piece attacks this idea ruthlessly by looking at the unintended consequences.
They asked a simple question. Who currently runs the small grocery stores, the bodegas, in New York City right now?
And who actually runs these bodegas? Because my understanding is that these aren't massive, faceless corporate chains.
Not at all. They're overwhelmingly run by immigrants. The article points out that immigrants from the Dominican Republic, Yemen, China, Bangladesh, and many other nations run these corner stores.
And these families work brutal, exhausting hours. They are up before dawn and close late at night.
These stores serve as the traditional economic ladder out of poverty for new immigrants arriving in the city.
So if the city steps in and opens subsidized, government-run grocery stores right down the street, offering food at artificially low prices funded by taxpayer dollars, what happens to the guy who spent his life savings opening a bodega?
It destroys him.
The critics argue that these government stores will directly compete with and crush these immigrant-owned businesses.
They argue Mamdani's progressive policy, designed in an academic vacuum to help the poor, would actually bankrupt the very working-class immigrants he claims he wants to protect and uplift.
It is a perfect example of what his critics call disastrous unintended consequences.
We have a stark divide here. Mamdani wants to tax the rich to build an expansive safety net and dismantle the citizen versus subject divide.
While his critics say he gaslights the public, threatens to ruin middle-class homeowners, and fundamentally misunderstands how the city's street-level economy actually works.
But that brings us to the most practical question of all. If you aggressively tax the billionaires, won't they just pack up their bags and leave?
The threat of the millionaire exodus hangs over this entire budget debate like a dark cloud. It is the ultimate fear for city planners.
And some high-profile billionaires are making very loud, very public threats. John Katzimatidis, the billionaire owner of the Gristedes grocery chain, publicly stated he might consider selling his entire business and closing his supermarkets if Mamdani's agenda moves forward.
Even the Democratic governor, Kathy Hochul, warned that the city simply cannot afford to lose any more wealthy residents to tax havens like Palm Beach, Florida, or Austin, Texas.
The stakes here are astronomical because the tax base in New York City is incredibly top-heavy. The data shows that the richest 1% of New York City residents pay nearly 48% of all personal income tax.
Think about the gravity of that statistic. 1% of the population funds nearly half of the city's entire income tax revenue.
And that dependency is growing rapidly. That number is up from 40% just back in 2019.
If even a fraction of those top earners leave,
finding out your
it
electric
punches
bill
a multi-billion-dollar hole in the
government's
city fund over
massive
night.
spending
But is that
addiction.
threat real? It is a pretty
if I'm a
shocking
billionaire
when you actually
facing
look at
a
the
massive
math.
tax
Right.
hike,
Well,
I would just
imagine
pack
for
my
a second
bags
that
for a
you have a
state with
savings
zero
account.
income tax. What does the
And,
actual data say about this
you swore to
millionaire
your family,
exodus?
hand
The
over heart,
numbers completely
that
defy
this money was
expectations.
strictly for fixing
An
a
article
leaking
from the
roof.
Everett Post reporting
You
on an
said,
ABC News
if
investigation
we don't fix
dug
this
deeply
roof,
into studies
the
from
house is
Stanford
gonna
University,
collapse.
It's an
the Treasury
existential
Department,
crisis for the
and the
House.
nonpartisan
It's the
Fiscal
Save the
Policy
House Fund.
Institute.
What
But
did
then,
they find?
your
The
car
data
breaks
shows
down,
that tax
you
flight
spend a
is
little too much
actually
on groceries,
extremely
you got
minimal.
bills piling
Really?
up. So what do? You
For
raise the
example,
roof
the
fund.
2023
You take that
Fiscal
money,
Policy
pay off your credit
Institute study
cards, and tell your
examined
family, hey, don't worry,
population
we'll fix the
movement
roof
after a
later.
previous New York State
And in this
income tax
scenario,
hike.
the roof is
They
the plan,
tracked the tax
or at least
returns of high
Maryland's climate
earners
goals.
and
Mm.
found
And
no
the car is a
statistically
massive,
significant evidence of
self-inflicted
tax migration.
$1.5
So they just stayed and paid the higher
billion
rate.
state
Exactly.
budget deficit.
The Stanford and
completely
Treasury
avoidable
researchers
deficit, I
confirmed
might
this,
add.
finding
Welcome
that
to the deep
millionaire
dive.
tax flight only
Today we're
occurs at the
exploring
very
a
margins.
classic case of
It makes
fiscal
for great
sleight of
headlines
hand
when a
coming out
CEO
of
moves to
Annapolis.
Florida,
We are
but it
looking
does
at
not
the
represent
Strategic
a
Energy
massive
Investment
structural
Fund.
exodus.
Why
to
do they
say it.
I find this fascinating.
It's a
If
huge
Florida or
pot of money
Texas offers
meant to save the
drastically lower
environment,
taxes,
but it's turning into a hidden
why do the
tax
wealthy
on every
tolerate
single
the punishing
person
rates in
paying
New York?
an
What
electric
keeps them
bill in
anchored?
Maryland. It comes
It
down to the
really is.
environment.
It's become the center of a
Jeffrey
huge
Winters, a
political
professor at
fight.
Northwestern
You've
University,
got a Democratic
explains that high
governor,
earners
frustrated
stay for the
environmentalists
precise,
making some very awkward
irreplaceable benefits
compromises,
a
and
massive
conservative
metropolis
critics who
provides.
are rightly calling this whole thing a shell
Exactly.
game.
A shell
They
game.
stay for the world-class
And when you look
theater,
at the documents we
vibrant
have
art
today,
scene,
the
Michelin-starred
reports,
restaurants,
budget proposals,
more
critiques
importantly,
from Senate
they stay
Republicans,
for the
it is
irreplaceable
really
business
hard to
networks
unsee it.
Our
and
mission
the
for this deep
massive
dive is
pool
simple.
of top-tier
Follow the
talent
money.
they can hire
Always
locally.
follow
You
the
cannot
money.
easily
We are going to
replicate
see
the
how a
cultural
fund
and economic
designed to
gravity
fight
of New York
climate
City
change
is
in a
being used to
quiet,
plug holes in the state
low-tax
budget.
suburb.
The
And we'll
city
dig into the
itself
argument
is
that
amenity
this
they're
isn't found
paying
money
for.
at all.
So
This
Mamdani
is
supporters
essentially
can
a
look at
backdoor
this data
tax
and
on
say,
families.
see, we can
Let's
tax
get right
them. They
into
complain
it.
on
The
television, they
Strategic
threaten to
Energy
close their
Investment Fund.
businesses,
It
but when
sounds
the bill
very
comes,
official,
they
very
stay.
important. They can
What does it
certainly
actually
argue
do?
that.
Well,
but the financial
on
experts
paper,
warn they still
it
need
is
to
the
proceed
state's
with extreme
green
caution.
piggy bank. This
Jared
IIF is
Walsack
managed by
from
the
the Tax
Maryland
Foundation
Energy Administration.
provided a
Its whole
crucial
stated
counter-warning
purpose
in that
is
same
to
report.
reduce
Which
energy
is
bills,
He notes
cut
that while
waste,
the
and
city will
fund
not instantly
renewable
empty out
energy.
overnight,
Like solar panels and
continually
efficiency
raising
upgrades.
taxes forces
Exactly.
movement on the
But
margins
here is
over
the
time.
real aha
It's
moment of
slow
the story.
bleed.
Yes. And
Where
because
does
those
the
top
money
earners pay
actually
such a
come
massive,
from?
disproportionate
Because
share
they
of the
aren't just
taxes,
taxing you
even a
directly
slow
for it.
marginal erosion of
No,
the
and
tax
that's why
base
politicians
causes severe
absolutely love
revenue
it. It
losses
feels
that
free.
compound year
So about
after
40% comes from
Losing a
regional
dozen
carbon
billionaires
auctions.
does not physically
But the
empty
big
the
chunk,
city.
the one
but
growing
it
like crazy,
quietly
comes
starves
with something
the
called
municipal
alternative compliance
And there is
payments,
another twist to this
or
population
ACPs.
data.
Which is just a fancy
The real
government term for a
exodus
fine.
might not be the
It's a fine
billionaires
for
at all.
failure.
Who
Let me
is
break
it?
it down.
Professor Winters
Maryland
points
law
out
forces
that
utility
while the media
companies
and
to buy a
politicians
certain
obsess
amount
over the
of green
wealthy
energy.
leaving,
They have to
the
prove they're
actual
using
massive
renewables.
outflow of
But if they
people
can't find that green
consists
energy,
of
or if it's just
low-income
way too
and
expensive on the market,
middle-income workers. which it usually
the
is.
exact
the state
people
gives them an
Mamdani
escape
wants
hatch.
to help.
Yes.
The utility
Yes.
can just pay
These
a
are the
fee
people who
directly to
simply
the state
cannot afford the
instead. That
baseline
fee
cost
is the
of living,
ACP.
the soaring
And here's
rents,
the
and the
kicker.
daily expenses in the city
Utilities
anymore.
are increasingly
They are the ones
just
actually
paying
packing the
fine
moving
because
trucks
it's cheaper
and
than
heading to
actually
cheaper
buying
states.
the green energy.
Which brings the
Wait,
entire
so
debate
the
full
climate
circle
fund is
back to
getting
Mamdani's core
incredibly
argument.
rich.
He insists he must
Precisely
aggressively
because
tax the
the
rich
green energy mandates are
specifically to
failing.
fund subsidized
It is a
programs that will
completely
keep the working
perverse
class from being
incentive.
priced out
The
of their
government
own
made the
neighborhood.
mandate so
And the
aggressive
conservative
and the
critics
market is so
counter
distorted
that his massive
that power
taxes and
companies are just
government
writing
overreach
checks to the state
will
instead of
ultimately
going green.
burden
And the
and
stats on this are
bankrupt
just
that
staggering.
exact
They
same
are.
working class.
In
So what does this all mean
2022,
for you,
this
the
revenue was
listener?
$77
Let's synthesize
million.
everything we just
By
tore through.
2025,
It's a lot to
it jumped to
process.
It is.
$365
We have an incredibly
million.
tense
Wow.
standoff in
From
America's
77
largest
million
city.
to
On one
365
side, you have a
million in 3
new,
years.
highly
Right, so now the
progressive
state
mayor.
has this
His intellectual
massive
roots,
accidental
deeply
pot of
influenced
gold.
by his father's
Supposedly
academic
for
work
green
on
projects.
colonial inequalities.
But remember, that money
drive
didn't
him
just
to
fall out of the
aggressively
sky.
deconstruct
Utility
wealth
companies
and
paid
build a
those
massive
fines.
safety net.
And do you
He
think
believes
those
the
massive
current system
corporations
fundamentally
just eat that
treats
cost
the
out of
working
goodness of their
class
hearts?
as
Oh,
subjects
absolutely not. They
rather
pass
than full
every every single penny
Right.
of that
On
onto
the other
customer.
side, you
Exactly.
have the
It shows
harsh,
up right on your
unforgiving
electric
mathematical
bill. So you,
realities
the everyday
of a
ratepayer, are paying for the
$127
utilities'
billion
failure
city
to meet a
budget
government
running
mandate.
a massive deficit.
The state
You have
collects your
fierce
money,
conservative
drops it in the
critics who
safe,
argue
and
that his
says,
policies
"Look at all
are
this cash we
naive
have
and
for the
destructive.
climate."
Which
They
brings
say
us
the
to the
United
rate.
States already provides a massive
Because that
welfare
money
state,
is definitely
and
not
that his
staying in
radical
the
agenda
climate
will
fund.
ultimately
Not anymore.
bankrupt
Enter
middle-class
Governor Wes
homeowners
Moore.
and destroy
His
immigrant-run
administration is
businesses.
staring
It
down
all
a
comes down
projected
to a battle over
$1.5
who
billion
pays for the
budget
future of the
deficit.
city.
When a government
$1.5
tries to
billion.
build an expansive
You
safety
can't just
net to
ignore
solve an
a hole that
affordability
deep.
crisis,
can't.
who
And when
ultimately
government
carries the weight?
overspends
It's
to
the
that
central
degree,
question.
they start
Do you
checking under the
aggressively
couch
tax
cushions for
the
loose
billionaires at the
change.
top Betting
Except
the
here,
Stanford
the couch
data is
cushion
right
is
in
the
the
Green
Will Not
Energy
Leave,
Fund,
or
and
do
the
you
loose
risk
change
triggering
is
a
hundreds of
massive
millions of
middle-class
taxpayer dollars.
property
So
tax
what's the
hike
actual
that
proposal?
hits
How
the
much are they
homeowner
taking?
who is
The
just trying to
governor's
get by?
plan diverts
We want you to think about
$292
this as you
million
watch these policies
directly from the
unfold.
safe
What do you
into
think
the state's general
constitutes
fund.
a fair
Just
share?
to balance the books.
This raises
Just
a
to cover
vital
their
question, and I want to
overspending.
leave you with a final
They
thought that
are
builds on
using
everything we
energy
discussed
fines
today.
to pay for
Let's return to the
general
lens of
government
Mahmoud Mamdani's
operations.
1996
Bureaucracy,
book.
salaries,
He
office
argued that
supplies,
the
you name
administrative
it.
systems
But that's
and
not even
laws
all of it.
built by
Yeah.
I
colonial
read in the
powers
sources there's also a
permanently
rebate
locked in
scheme.
social
Yes,
divisions,
this is the
shaping
part
the
critics are
destiny of
calling a
entire
political
nations
sweetener.
long after
They're
the
grabbing
colonizers
another
packed up and left.
$100 million
If the
out of the
structural and
fund
economic
to give a
systems we build today
one-time
permanently shape the
$40
future,
rebate
how
to
might these
eligible
aggressive
households.
new tax and welfare
$40.
policies lock
So
in
let me
the
get this straight.
demographic and
The
economic
state
destiny
mandates
of
drive up
major
energy
American
costs
cities
for
the
generations
utility
to come,
companies pass those
long
massive
after today's
costs to you and
politicians have
me.
left the state.
Our bills go
That
up by
is a
hundreds of
brilliant
dollars a
question to
year.
ponder. We covered
And then
a
the governor
massive
takes a
amount of
chunk of
ground
our own
today,
money,
diving from
hands us back
post-colonial
a crisp
African history all
$40
the way
bill,
to the
and
daily
basically
struggles of a
says,
New York
"You're
bodega
welcome."
owner.
That is the exact
Thank you
math.
for joining
It's
us on
wild.
Deck
And if you
Dive.
look at the
Keep
recent
reading,
supplemental
keep questioning
budget,
the
they're
numbers behind
cutting
the
or
news,
shifting
and we will
another
catch
$80
you
million.
next
When you
time.